Welcome to A Look Inside. I'm your host, Demetria Head, and today's special guest is Richard Harland, author of Farron and the Angel, Book One. Welcome.
Hi.
So let's get into Book One. Farron begins as a quiet outsider in a fearful, superstitious tribe, yet he shows remarkable courage and curiosity when he chooses to help Muriel. Am I pronouncing that name right?
Yeah,
Mir
Mirail. Yeah,
Muriel? Okay.
yeah.
So what drew you to Farron's character as the emotional core of this story, and how did you approach crafting his quiet rebellion against the conformity of the people?
Oh, look, I've got to do a little sidetrack here because, in a sense, I didn't choose Ferren. The
Okay.
way the story started, it was always going to be Ferren because it actually started with, it's going to sound corny, isn't it? It started with a dream, but I've always had these very vivid dreams that I like
Hmm.
movies and they give me a lot of ideas for a lot of my novels. And this was the dream that actually turned into the first 12 pages of Ferren and the Angel, like just copied out. I mean, it's almost like a dead transcript of the dream. And in the dream, I was under a sort of a something like a blanket, and I lifted it up and I peered out and looked up at the night sky, and there were all these strange lights and terrifying sounds and booms and chants and weird things going on in the sky. And I
Hmm.
knew, in dreams how you sort of seem to know things as if someone's told you. I knew in my dream that's the great war going on between heaven and earth.
Hmm.
And as I lay there looking at it, one of the lights up in the sky started coming down, descending closer and closer and closer, came whooshing down, almost seemed to hit me, and came down, crashed close by.
Hmm.
And I was sort of, when I woke up out of that dream, it wasn't a long dream, this one, but it was very,
Uh-huh.
very vivid. And when I woke up, I was sort of in that half sleeping, half awake state. And I thought,
Hmm.
that's got to be an angel shot down. And she's
Okay.
crashed down close by and she's injured. And I want to go out and investigate and see.
Hmm.
And that was the start of the whole trilogy. And although enormous numbers of things have changed in the writing of the trilogy, that 12 pages at the start has never changed. It was just the dream. And so,
Okay.
in a sense, me became Ferren. So Ferren was always going to be me. There was not really any choice about it. And if I was to look at Ferren's character, yeah, he's got some, not all virtues, but the virtues that I've got, I think Ferren has got.
Yeah.
He's very, very determined
Hmm.
and he thinks for himself. He's a quiet outsider. I like that. It's a good description of him. He's a quiet outsider, but he has his own mind and he's very, very curious.
Hmm.
And I mean, I'm not actually inventing a character there. I'm just writing myself, the best parts of myself, if you like. But those are that comes to me naturally, and that's why Fern is, in a sense, the center of the experience all the way through the entire trilogy. He is the one that you see things through.
Hmm.
Other characters are more unusual and more odd and more different, some very, very different. But Ferren is kind of the one that you can relate through and see
Right.
the world through.
Okay.
Does that all make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I don't
I'm
think.
sorry if I didn't answer why I chose to use Ferren because I didn't choose him. It just,
Uh-huh.
there was never any way of having anyone else as the central character.
Mhm.
And I became Ferren and Ferren was me.
Oh yeah, well, that still answers it,
Right.
how he came about and who he represents. And I definitely don't think it's corny because I've had authors on here, like I was interviewing an author yesterday, and what her book was mostly inspired by something that came to her in a dream. And I think dreams
Yeah.
can be significant. So there
I
and
think
apparently. Hmm.
dreams can give you things that you're conscious. I mean, you can have all sorts of good ideas to put into a
Hmm.
novel, but
Oh,
a
absolutely.
dream is something left center. It sort of it
Yes.
gives you things that you wouldn't have thought of
Right,
in your conscious
exactly.
mind. And that was certainly something that idea of a war going on between heaven and earth
Hmm.
and being there in the middle of it and looking up at it, that would
Right.
never have occurred to me in my conscious mind in a million years.
But you know what? Apparently, it made a wonderful story.
Well, I hope so.
So let's
It
talk.
took a long, long while between the dream actually and being able, because I had to sort of first work out why this world was the way it was, and
Uh-huh.
then work out what was going to happen in it. And it took me many, many years after the dream before I could actually get there. It didn't follow immediately from the dream. It took a
Yeah.
long, long while of the dream was the seed, and then I
Mhm.
had to let it grow into something that was a readable story for everyone else.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It was well worth it then. It was well worth it.
Right.
And you know, I think in some cases, some of the best stories take time. They take time. You know, who says you have to crank it out in a year?
Mm,
I've had authors who've taken 15, 10 years
mm,
to really clean up and hone their craft with a specific story.
mm.
You
And
know.
I would bet a lot of the fantasy writers that you've talked to would be
Mhm.
in that category, right? Because fantasy,
Yes.
you've got it. I mean, with a thriller, and you're a thriller writer, and you know, in a sense, story and character is crucial.
Hmm.
But the background sort of falls more into place.
Yes.
Whereas with fantasy,
Hmm.
you've got to create the world from the grassroots
Yeah,
up. You've got to think of
you
every
do.
little thing
You do.
and
Mhm.
develop it way back from the beginning, and that takes a lot of time.
It
And if you
does.
get something wrong and it doesn't match up in the end, then you've stuffed up your world.
That is so true. You know, I think it takes a special kind of writer to be able to pull off a really good fantasy story, because of all the intricate details and the complexities that go into that world building and really shaping the whole book. So I
Yeah,
can
and though as we
appreciate
were
it.
sort of starting to say earlier on, just chatting.
Mhm.
The danger for fantasy writers is that they get obsessed with that, and then they forget about the story and the characters, and that's the big danger. That's what you have to fight against as a fantasy writer,
Mhm.
getting too carried away with the specifics of your world building
Mhm.
and not having the story that really makes the most of that world and is exciting and good as a story,
Yeah,
that you would want to read regardless of any world that it happened to be in.
yeah. So how do you balance that? You know, how do you balance that to
I,
keep
I
from getting lost?
I think it's taken me a bit of a while to get that balance right because to me, yes, I mean when I talk about how difficult it is for fantasy writers, I know that myself from experience that the world tends to you want to tell people about the world and you end up telling people too much about the world.
Hmm.
And that's not why people read books. They want the world, but they don't want it pushed in their faces. They don't want to have to digest a whole lot of world before they even get into the story and the
Right,
characters.
right.
And I think I've got the balance right now. I
Hmm.
mean, that dream start is actually the ideal way to start a fantasy because when it turned into the novel, Felon is in a little corner of this huge world. He
Hmm.
knows there's a war going on between heaven and earth, but this was in the dream. He doesn't actually know what it is. He doesn't understand anything about it.
Right.
And he lives with a tribe that is completely ignorant
Mm.
of the world that they exist in. So there's, in a sense, the world starts from a tiny corner
Hmm.
and it builds up as the story builds up. And that is, I guess, the best way to do it for a fantasy writer is not to try and throw the whole world out at the beginning,
Hmm.
but to let the characters discover it as they're going through their story.
Yeah.
That works for me, I think.
So Muriel's transformation from a distant celestial to someone who must navigate a very physical world, it creates a striking arc. So how did you balance her initial detachment with her growing sense of empathy and awareness? And then this is a two-part question. I'll let you answer that first, and then I'll ask the other part.
Okay, well, I guess in a way, what I was wanting to do with Muriel was what Tolkien did with elves.
Mm,
Um, the angels have been diminished, Disneyfied, if you like. Been made into these cute or attractive or pleasant little things in the
Right.
way that elves were cute and pleasant and attractive. And that's not my vision of angels at all. I want to get back to well, the awe-inspiring sense of angels as something terrible and beautiful
Hmm.
and very, very strange, very alien to us.
Yeah.
And that's what I sort of started off with Muriel.
Mm.
And that was the big challenge to create a kind of being that was so unlike anything we've ever experienced. It completely is a spiritual being who doesn't have physical experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But then you can't actually create that. I mean, that is no one can create that far away from real life, and no reader is going to be interested or sympathetic with a character who is that far away from their ordinary life. So when Muriel crashes to Earth at the beginning and Farron finds her, she's reduced from the very beginning. She starts off as a completely non-human being,
Mm-hmm.
but she is gradually humanized. The humanization is her story in a way through the whole of Feminine and the Angel,
Hmm.
because she's lost the aura that protects her from Earth's atmosphere, and she starts to feel things that no angel has ever felt before.
Yeah.
I mean, this was lovely. This was the challenge actually to imagine what it would be like feeling things for the very first time. If you'd never ever experienced the touch of
Mm.
grass under your back,
Right.
or stones and dirt, or
Mm-hmm.
even breathing earthly air,
Mm-hmm.
and what would it be like? And of course, it would be very, very scary. I mean, and revulsive. I mean, like Mirael is repelled by all this physicality. She's lived a pure spiritual life, and these physical things, they just well, she doesn't want them. She hates them. She doesn't want this pressure of physical things. And I guess, I'm sort of, well, it's my ideal as a fantasy writer, no, as a writer in general, will be to
Mm.
create things as if for the first time, as if they'd never been experienced before.
Yeah.
And for Muriel, this is an experience she's never experienced before. But my aim is to draw on things that we have all experienced,
Hmm.
but expand them and develop them and grow them into something that is on a different level entirely.
Right.
So, I mean, we've all experienced, say, lying sick in bed and feeling the sheets
Mm.
pressing into our backs, and the grottiness of the sheets, and sort of little bits of grit in lying on, getting out of lying in the sand and getting bits of sand on you, those sorts
Yeah.
of feelings. We all have them. But to take that to a sort of an almost metaphysical level.
Hmm.
And he was an angel experiencing it for the very first time. And that's how I sort of started out with her. And the it sort of led me to the realization that because she's fallen to earth, she's going to be disgusted by everything physical. She's repelled by, she's been brought down. She's been lowered to a lesser state of existence altogether.
Yeah.
And when she sees Feven, and Feven, a tribesman, in a very degraded condition, human beings have been brought back very, very low, as you know. Well, he's living a bare minimal survival existence. And when she sees him and smells him,
Mm.
and she's disgusted, she's appalled, and that brings out a side of her that I kind of like doing this. It's sort of like it is the other side of her awesomeness and her superior level of existence.
Hmm.
She's snooty. She's snobby. She looks down on him. This is a dirty little thing, this grotty little human being. And she doesn't want to have anything to do with him. She's repelled that he would even try and talk to her. And so that's kind of also drawing upon something that, is there in real life.
Hmm.
Looking down on someone as if they're below on a lower level altogether. And
Hmm.
she doesn't start out as a very nice character in that way, but it comes out of how she's situationed, how she's fallen from a higher level existence to a lower level existence. And of course, she fights against that lower level. She doesn't want to be on it. She doesn't want any part of herself to be on it. She doesn't want to admit that in some ways her own nature has changed
Hmm.
because she's no longer pure angel. She's no longer purely spiritual. And oh, she absolutely hates that.
That's very deep how you explain that. Very, very interesting. Wow.
It is. It's like a sort of a metaphysical challenge to convey something that's so much outside anything that anyone in real life has actually experienced.
Yeah.
And yet, the trick with fantasy, this is what I always find with fantasy, the trick is to actually look for things in real life
Hmm.
that I've experienced, that the reader has experienced, and build them out into something on a different kind of level.
Yeah.
That's a big principle about fantasy.
Hmm.
Take there was an American poet called Marianne Moore who talked about real toads in imaginary gardens. And I take that as being like the real element
Hmm.
within the total imagination. And I
Yeah.
think you've always got to have that real element there.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
However much you let the imagination run wild, there's got to be a connection to real life and to the reader's real life.
That's a really good way to explain it. I like how
Mm.
you broke that down. The other part to it is, are there any deeper themes that you were exploring through her adjustment to Earth?
I guess it's sort of, I wanted to be fair to both sides. She needs to be humanized.
Mm,
By her nature, she's no longer pure angel, and she needs to be humanized. And in a sense, being a human being, I'm on the side of humanity. I wanted to be humanized. But I also wanted to convey what she's lost. The sense that her life in heaven was something, well, I guess my key notion of her existence in heaven is serenity.
mm,
The idea that life is a sort of a perpetual serenity, and the angels all they touch spirit to spirit. They're all kind of in communion with each other. That wonderful feeling of communion and community, which she's had in heaven, and it's sad that she's lost it. And it's I think hopefully sad for the reader too. And so yes, she regrets it,
mm.
and through the trilogy, she continues to want to get back to it. But she does have to learn to be a human being, not a human being, but she's never a human being. But she has to learn to take on some of the things that human
Yes.
beings live with. And I like that. I like that life is not so pure and spiritual. You can't live on an exalted plane forever. You have to accept that life is a bit of a mess
Yeah.
and uncomfortable and full of little bits of grit and dirt.
Yes. Yes. That is so true. So you have other characters like Zonda, and I hope I'm pronouncing these right. Zonda, Shuf, and Neith.
Yeah, I just call him Shuff, but up
Oh,
to you.
Chef. Okay, I'm
Well, no
sorry.
one can say. No one can say. It's up to the reader to do that.
So they each seem to reflect different forces in Farron's world: tradition, fear, and control. How do you use these supporting characters to challenge Farron and shape the tension in his community?
Well, Neith is the leader of the community, his little tribe, and he represents everything that's gone really bad with human beings. Human beings have been displaced by the artificial human, and human beings live in little isolated tribes, and they are cowering, fearful, beaten down creatures.
Hmm.
And Leith is the sort of example of someone who is beaten down, who has kind of like accepted the fact that life depends on the artificial human, that it depends on being weak and small and keep low, keep small, keep out of sight. That's his motto.
Yeah.
And so he kind of represents that spirit in the whole tribe, which
Hmm.
only Ferren is really against. Shuff is the, I suppose, represents the traditional aspect of the tribe. I mean, he's that old man that everyone knows. We've all had them in art when we were kids who said, "This is the way you do it because this is the way it's always been done. So
Yeah.
just keep doing
Yeah.
it that way." You know, and he's that's his mentality. Everything has to be the way that it always was, and he doesn't want to think of anything new. Now, Zonda. Yeah, Zonda is a different case. I mean, Zonda is actually she grew and grew. She was one of those characters that turned out bigger and more fun and more full of life than I'd ever imagined.
Hmm.
Because she starts off, well, she's a bit obnoxious in a way. She's coming on to Ferren really heavily whenever Ferren doesn't really understand what's going on, and she's also very self-confident, very sort of she sort of pushes herself around and throws her weight around,
Hmm.
but she's fantastic. I mean, I didn't think I was going to love her so much. I mean, the way her voice just took off when I started, and her voice and her mannerisms and everything she does. I didn't really know where she was going to go. I
Hmm.
thought she was an aspect of the tribe,
Yeah.
but I didn't know that she was going to become so independent. And in a way, I just fell in love with Zonda. Zonda, I got to admit, I've reactions from readers. Some love her, some hate her. She's that sort of character. You love her or you hate her. And I love her, but I can understand it. But, I don't know that I would want to meet her in real life. But I love her in a book, and she's just so much alive. She has so much life in her. She is so self-confident and cocksure and absolutely certain of herself.
Hmm.
And so, in a sense, she when she uses that for the tribe's purposes, when her father is Neith, the leader of the tribe, and she's sort of his favorite, and when she's on side with the tribe, yes, she's a force that you don't really want to have against you. But the thing is that she does have a strength of character that, like Ferren, marks her out as a bit different from the tribe. You
Hmm.
felt that she, right from the beginning, this kind of strength of character doesn't quite go with the beaten down, cowering nature of the tribe in general. And she comes good. I always wanted her to come good, but more and more I wanted her to come good. She's never really going to change. I mean, Zonda is one of those people who will always bounce back. Nothing can keep her down for long. And I just found I really wanted Zonda to come good, and she does
Hmm.
come good towards the end of Feminine and the Angel, where you see that her strength of character actually can work against the cowering,
Yeah.
fearful mentality of the tribe. She
Hmm.
becomes, from having sort of betrayed Ferrell and sort of really been his enemy in one way, she
Hmm.
becomes, she cooperates with him, she works with him. The two of them have something in common. I guess you said Felon the quiet outsider. Well, Zonda is the very loud insider,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
she's similar in character. She thinks for herself too, not
Yeah.
quite as soon as Felon does, but she does.
Hmm.
And yeah, I love Zonda. She just she just she just wanted to go her own way. I mean, I just
Hmm.
she decided what role she wanted to have, and I had to follow her along.
Right. So the people's rituals involving objects from a forgotten era, like the fly spray cans and dolls, are both imaginative and poignant. Were these customs inspired by a desire to comment on cultural memory, or do they serve a larger symbolic purpose in your world building?
Well, I guess the main thing is, and this was in your response, I think that um, they're not to be laughed at. I would be really upset if people thought that this was making the people, that's the tribe's name, if the people
Mhm.
look
Yeah.
ridiculous. Because it is sort of comical in a way. I mean, they have a fly spray can and they worship it and they go around holding it up high and pressing the button and saying, "Ah, the perfume of the gods, the perfume of the ancestors." And it's funny, and I hope it's funny.
Mhm.
But to me, it's also not laughing at them.
Yeah.
It's kind of laughing, but being on side with them too. And it's sort of sad that they are still worshipping this past that they've lost because these are humans that have 1,000 years ago they were us, they were the Western civilization in
Yeah.
the early 20th century, and things have gone downhill and downhill and downhill until the real human beings have been reduced to these degraded little pockets of humanity, and the artificial human have taken over and rule the world. But the tribes still cling on to the memory of what was there. And I hadn't thought of it. It's actually, your question makes me think of this more now. In a sense, they what they are is it's like a lot of peoples around the modern world,
Hmm.
peoples that have been somehow displaced, where the world has moved on, the new sort of things have come about that
Mm.
make their old way of life kind of meaningless.
Yeah.
And for the tribe of the people, of course, the fly spray can
Hmm.
is meaningless. I mean, what they don't understand what it's for,
Hmm.
and they don't understand what a baby doll is for, and they don't understand what a cigarette lighter is for. They don't understand what these things are really for. So they've kind of lost that connection with their past, but they still hanker after the importance that those things had in their
Yeah.
lives. Those things are still matter, and they want to recover them. And of course, at the end of Heaven and the Angel, they sort of recover that, and it becomes the crucial thing that gives them a new kind of spirit.
Hmm.
But yeah, I guess in a way it does relate to the state of all the peoples around the world that have been sort of a bit left behind, and their old way of life.
Yeah.
They've still got the residues, and they still feel they ought to mean something, and
Hmm.
they still cling to them, um, and yet they don't have the meaning they once did. They've
Hmm.
been displaced by modern inventions, modern
Yeah.
technology, modern ways of thinking, and yeah, I value that. I value their old things. I value the kind of they had a culture that they've lost, and they want to get it back again,
Hmm.
and that would put the meaning back in their lives.
Yeah. Because
That was a good question. Thank you for asking me that. I've just I hadn't really thought that through before, but now I have. Yeah.
I'm glad I asked because it does also make you think about how that applies even in today's society. Like when like I watch documentaries and when you see these um I what would you call you see some of these traditional the tribes that really hold on to their traditions, but you see modern society has displaced them, like in oh, I forget which kind. Well, like certain parts of Africa, and even in where else?
Australia.
Yes, yes,
Mm,
yes. I guess you could say that with the
mm,
Aboriginal
mm,
people. Yeah, so like there's some tribes like that still hold on to those traditions, but
mm,
then you see all this advancement going on around them,
mm,
just leaving them behind kind of like they're still
mm,
existing while
yeah.
all these changes are taking place.
Mm.
It's
And the
it's
thing
just
is, you
cool.
can have all these advances and all these sort of technological improvements
Hmm.
and live with them, and they're advantageous to your life. But in the meanwhile, the meaning that you had in your own life, your
Hmm.
old way of life, has
Yeah.
seeped out. It's
Hmm.
been lost,
Hmm.
and you're never quite sure. As I'm imagining this for sort of sympathetically, you don't know where the meaning has gone.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like that about technology. Like I know we need to advance as human beings. We've been gifted to advance. That's how we've come this far. Um, but I also feel like I find myself trying to hold on to, it's nothing like holding a book in your hand, you know, and so I hold on to that. I still, like, every chance I get, if I can buy a book or if an author sends me a hard copy, I'm like, oh, this just, it feels like home. This is what I grew up, you know, just
Yeah.
holding a book in your hand and reading it. It took me quite a bit to adjust to reading on the computer or the tablet and downloading the books into Kindle. And I still
Yeah,
kind of struggle with that, but I'm like, okay, okay,
yeah,
this is part of technology. But it
yeah.
can be
But I
scary to
mean,
keep.
there are kind of imponderable things, aren't there, that still matter,
Mhm.
and they're sort of like
Yes.
emotional attachments.
Hmm.
And I think emotional attachments kind of can carry on through generation after generation. And yeah,
That is so true. So Farron and Miriel began to develop a bond rooted in mutual curiosity rather than conflict. Why do you choose to center the story on a slow building friendship rather than a more traditional rivalry or romance?
I guess not romance because I could. This goes with my idea of Muriel as a different kind of being
Hmm.
who exists in a different kind of way, and I couldn't really see Ferran and Muriel. I mean, if Ferran and Muriel were to get together as a couple, as an item,
Hmm.
in a sense, to me that would be Disney-ish. That's like the kind of angels that that fall to earth, and they're really just human beings with yeah. And I didn't want that happening.
Hmm.
So actually, there are complications with that in book two, but yeah, it's I never thought of Ferran and Muriel coming together as an item in the end.
Hmm.
But yeah, friendship. The thing is that I want it to be a difficult friendship, a friendship almost in spite of themselves, because, well, first of all, Muriel despises and is revolted by Ferran. She's a
Hmm.
lower kind of being. She doesn't want to think about it.
Hmm.
Ferran on his side is in awe of Muriel and afraid of her too, because of all the things that, well, his tribe has always believed that angels are terrible, also dangerous, bad beings. They're the enemy because the tribe imagines they're on the side of the artificial human fighting for the earth. And in
Hmm.
fact, they're just being exploited, but they don't know that. But Farron is kind of just so much in awe of Mirail, and yet being Farron, he's curious and he thinks to himself, and so he starts asking questions. And when he starts asking questions, he kind of becomes more on the same level.
Yeah.
So they do very, very slowly get to share things. And Femin realizes that Muriel isn't perfect in every way.
Mhm.
And Muriel realizes that Femin isn't imperfect in every way. He's not just grotty and dirty and grubby and low. He's actually got a determination and a will that, in a
Mm,
sense, she's never encountered before, because that kind of driving, determined will doesn't exist in heaven,
mm,
doesn't need to exist in heaven.
mm.
So they kind of develop a respect for each other,
Yeah,
and that's the form that their friendship takes. But it's never going to be an easy friendship. It's
right.
never like they're going to be totally comfortable with each other.
Hmm.
But by the end, of course, the connection between them is what enables Femin and Mirael to save the tribe from the great battle between heaven and earth that's fought over their territory. And in the story as a whole, they're coming together, which is a mortal and a supernatural being, has never happened before. And it is what changes the course of history. That's it is a crucial connection, but I
Hmm.
didn't want to make it easy.
Right, right. Yeah, because where's the fun in that?
Yeah, well, true. Yeah, you got to have pickups, haven't you? Hmm.
You've kind of touched on this earlier, but you feel free to go into as much detail as possible. Farron begins to question long-held beliefs, and he discovers that the world around him is more complicated than he was taught. So, how important was it to you to portray a young protagonist challenging the narratives he's been raised on or raised to believe?
Hmm. I think this is, I mean, stepping outside myself and looking at myself from outside.
Hmm.
It's something that I've done in various books. It keeps coming into my books.
Hmm.
Um, a young character discovering himself and discovering that he isn't just a part of his world and his society, that
Mm,
the assumptions that exist in his society are they can be challenged. They're not simply automatically true and taken for granted. This was a major theme in World Shaker, my steampunk novel, and it's a theme in the Ferren and the Angel too. Ferren learns to step outside his society to the extent of being able to
mhm,
question it and challenge it. And maybe this is me again. Maybe because I do remember when I was a child, I was a very good child.
mhm,
I didn't really think about anything much or question anything much. And somewhere around about, I don't know, age 11, 12 or so, I turned and kind of became very rebellious. I mean, I suppose that's a pretty common move. The only thing is that it happened much later for me than it does for most kids nowadays. But I sort of was aware that not everything that I'd been told and took for granted was necessarily true. And that's what Ferren goes through. He discovers, well, I suppose it happens gradually for much of the novel,
mm,
and then it happens dramatically and shockingly when he discovers what happens to the people of his tribe and all other tribes that are taken to the human camp,
mhm,
supposedly for military service. But what is actually done to them is quite horrifying.
mhm,
And the sheer shock of that wakes him up completely. And he's, well, from then on, he's a totally changed person. And he knows that he can't simply accept the world the way that it is.
mhm.
And that's where his whole story comes from. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to get sidetracked just a little bit because when you mentioned World Shaker, your steampunk book, is that the only steampunk book or is Liberator, Song of the Slums, are those
You've named
steampunk
them.
and Ghost by
You've named
Gaslight?
them.
Okay. Okay, I
World
just
Shaker, Liberator, and Song of the Slums are my three steampunk novels.
okay.
But at the same time, there is quite a bit of steampunk in Feather and the Angel too, because this world is 1,000 years in the future, and the
Hmm.
artificial human have developed technology, a new technology, which in some ways is incredibly powerful, but in some ways it's also quite retro.
Hmm.
So steampunk elements come into it,
Yeah.
and I do like steampunk.
You know, I
It's-
didn't years ago, yeah, I love it too. I didn't think that I would ever love steampunk in any way, shape, or form, but my nieces helped me to realize, oh, this is really cool because I have a niece who's had to do a steampunk rendering in one of her art classes, it was like a graphic art class. And I grew a different appreciation for steampunk. And then when you hear people talk about it, incorporating those elements into their writing, I'm like, oh, this is really cool. But I did the same thing about dystopian fiction. I didn't think I would like it, but I do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the steampunk is supremely good for visuals. I
Yeah.
mean, um, the sort of visuals you can create around kind of
Hmm.
bizarre technology are so striking and so effective.
Hmm.
And and everyone loves cosplaying steampunk. It's the element that
Yes.
keeps coming back into cosplaying.
Oh.
It's great visually, and it fits with me because I've got a very strong visual imagination.
Hmm.
It's
It
funny actually
does.
when I finished my first novel. See, I'd been a university lecturer, and I'd actually written some
Oh.
books that are very abstract and theoretical.
Oh.
And I always wanted to be a writer, but I never thought I would be. I always thought I'd be a bit, similar to my academic writing, be a bit abstract and theoretical, a bit
Hmm.
well, not that fleshed out. And when I finished my very first novel, The Vicar of Morbing Vile, and people came back to me and said, it's like watching a movie. I thought, what? Me? And it's true. People have kept saying about it all about my books ever
Mhm.
since, and I realised my mind must be split in two halves. And the visual imagination side kind of is
Yes.
what runs when I'm writing fiction, and
Yeah.
I go forward. I let it run.
I love that because anytime a book grabs me and it reads in such a way that I can actually see this happening on the movie screen, then that person has done well.
Did you see that with Fern and the Angel?
Hmm.
Yeah.
With all three. And it even in how you talk, and this is a compliment. You talk like a writer describing a movie scene. And that
Oh, okay.
translates into your book as well.
Okay. I
Mhm.
hadn't realised that, but yeah, I mean, it is the way I think. I'm
Mhm.
not thinking of making a movie. I mean,
But I
probably.
would love to see this. I would love to see that as a movie.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think from a movie maker's point of view, they don't particularly want books that look like movies because they want to do their own visual imagination. I don't know, but yeah,
If
I see books
only.
as movies. Yeah.
If only. So, throughout the book, Farron's growth from self-doubt to quiet leadership is gradual but significant. Can you speak to his development as a character and how you envisioned his role evolving from uncertainty to conviction? I feel like you have been touching on that.
I've been touching on it, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, right, again, I bring in the real life thing.
Hmm.
Um, One big sort of important stage in my own life in development, discovering that I had the resilience and the power to survive on my own was when I finished high school and I had this crazy idea that I could go over to France
Hmm.
and get some sort of job teaching English to French people. Totally insane, and everyone told me it was insane. But I thought that was, it sounded like good. This was quite a long while ago. I mean, nowadays people from England go over to the continent all the time, but in those days it was a very strange country, and you went for your holidays in England, not overseas.
Yeah.
So going overseas was a big step,
Hmm.
and I went overseas and very soon discovered that I couldn't actually find anyone who wanted to be taught English and would pay me for it.
Hmm.
And I ended selling newspapers to tourists in Paris
Oh,
and then hitchhiking around the whole of Europe. It's kind of on a shoestring,
wow.
but it was a time when I, well, going around, when I was hitchhiking around, for instance, having to find places to sleep at night.
Hmm.
I mean, I soon discovered that the best places are building sites under construction. And I could sneak into building
Okay.
sites that are under construction and find little corners that I
Hmm.
could sort of snuggle up in and manage to keep warm and safe.
Hmm.
And do you remember when Ferren gets put into exile, when he's driven into exile by his tribe, and he's walking along
Yes.
by the overbridge, and every night, because the night is so terrifying with these sounds
Uh-huh.
and lights going on in the wall of heaven overhead, he wants to find somewhere to sleep, somewhere safe to sleep. So finding a safe place to sleep is very important to him. And yeah, that comes from my life, and it comes from me to Ferren, that time of kind of discovering that you can survive,
Hmm.
that that even even when everything's against you and you're you're absolutely down on your uppers, you've got no context, no support group, no family, friends, nothing. You
Hmm.
can still survive.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what I learnt, particularly at that time of my life. So there
Wow.
it is for Ferren too.
Okay, let's talk about Zonda. She starts off combative and unpredictable, which we briefly discussed earlier, and later reveals unexpected layers and strength. What inspired her transformation, and how does she reflect the complexities of growing up in a fractured world?
I think, I mean, I'm going to start off the same way I finished, which is saying Zonda kind of defined herself and
Yeah.
made her own role because she wanted to be the way she is.
Mhm.
Um, Zonda, Zonda does have a. Oops, we still there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. You've disappeared off the screen, but as long as
Oh,
I'm still, as long as you can see me and I
yes.
can be heard.
Yes.
Wonder what happened there. Um, so I mean, Zonda is capable of taking charge of things. I mean, Feren learns to be a leader, but
Mhm.
Zonda always assumes that she's a leader. Right from the very start, she thinks of herself as a leader. She expects people to follow her in what she does. Feren has to learn that and has to acquire some skills that enable him to lead other people. But Zonda has it from the very start, and I think Zonda. Well, I could have written the novel about Zonda. If there was any one character who could have been the center of the trilogy other than Ferren, it would have been Zonda.
Okay.
But I didn't start out from Zonda. Yeah.
Speaking of, do you plan to do any, after this trilogy, do you plan to do any books where you're expanding on some of the characters, such as Zonda?
At the moment, the story is built up in this gigantic arc all the way to book three, and book three is such a huge culmination and climax that
Mm,
it kind of wraps everything up. So I'd
yeah.
have to start, I'd need to take a step backwards and start thinking again.
Hmm.
And yes, there are growing points there, but I'd have to start. I need more distance before I could start thinking about. There's no obvious sequels. I
Mm.
don't know that there are any obvious prequels. There are other character stories that might come in as kind of side stories, but
Okay.
yeah, I've got to think about it. I really have to recover my energy to get the imagination going all over again.
Recuperate.
Yeah, exactly.
Woo! So Muriel's experiences on Earth strip away her assumptions and challenge her sense of identity. Was her arc meant to mirror a fall from grace? And I feel like we kind of talked about this too, or is it more of a rebirth into something deeper and more grounded? We know that she had to make a huge adjustment.
Mm. I suppose, I mean, the old term for it is Felix culpa, a fortunate fall. I mean, she falls.
Hmm.
But it's not just fortunate. Yeah, as I said before, she does have a genuine loss.
Hmm.
She is really deprived of something, and that sense of just being part of a communion, of touching spirit to spirit, as the angels do, and they all know each other, and they all kind of know what each other's going to do and what they're all thinking together. It's a serene, comforting, total, holistic kind of life. But there are things outside it, and that is what Morale learns because she's forced to learn it.
Hmm.
But yes, she has to discover friendship. She has to discover human feelings, even if they're hurtful. Just looking on to the rest of the trilogy, I suppose. But yes, she, in the end, she decides that she wants to be on the earth, and I guess that's her total arc is from, if you think of the beginning of the novel, where she's just sickened by all this dirt and grubbiness and physicality, kind
Hmm.
of pressing in on her and dirtying her up, and yuck. By the end of the final volume, she's made a decision when she actually could go back to heaven. She doesn't want to.
Hmm.
Her true path is down here on the earth.
Okay. You introduce an unsettling concept where technology, memory, and humanity intertwine in disturbing ways. How did you come up with the technological aspects of the world, and were they meant to reflect contemporary fears or something timeless?
Oh, they probably reflect my fears. I've always been a bit afraid of technology. I'm afraid of misuse of technology,
Yeah.
and I mean, it just a bit. I don't know. It goes back as far as being a kid and watching. steam engines pulling at the
Hmm.
station. There's something awe-inspiring and terrifying about that much power and strength. And
Yeah.
I guess all of my steampunk novels and the steampunk parts of the Femin trilogy and Femin the Angel, which are all associated with the Humen and their camp, their sort of military industrial camp,
Hmm.
they they're dark and black and ugly.
Hmm.
And in some ways, I like them being dark and black and ugly because I guess I guess the thing I most like is kind of bland prettiness. I'd rather have something that had character by being black and dark and ugly
Hmm.
than something that was just pretty and
Yeah.
kind of neutral and bland.
Hmm.
So I've always been drawn to what you might call a gothic version of technology,
Yeah.
the kind of dark. I mean, it came in with painters in the original Industrial Revolution. They sort of painted machinery and things like
Yeah.
that
Hmm.
as dark and terrifying and fearsome. And that's what the human have developed. Their technology is in some ways huge in scale,
Hmm.
but it's not electronic. It's not smart and clean and sort of home devices or anything. It's very much industrial.
Hmm.
Where I live in Wollongong, actually, in the south coast of Australia, in New South Wales,
Okay.
I'm alongside a whole string of beautiful beaches, but
Hmm.
I'm also very, very close to the biggest steelworks in the Southern Hemisphere.
Oh, wow.
And just going around that steelworks, these vast, huge bits of machinery, and the iron ore, sort of the smelting of the iron ore and things like that. It gives you a feeling. It really does. It's emotionally, it kind of gets my imagination going. So that's the kind of technology that the human have,
Hmm.
and that's the steampunk side of it. There's also the effects of 1,000 years of war between heaven and earth, um, and I suppose human technology, a kind of combination of mechanical and fleshly
Hmm.
that's unsettling. I mean, there's
Yeah.
something, I mean, it goes back as far back as, let's think of it. There's an old surrealistic painting which showed a spoon covered in fur. Maybe it was a photo, I can't remember, but a spoon covered in fur. That's unnatural. It makes you uneasy. Things don't go together like that. But that's a sort of surrealistic element that I work on as well. And I mean, the obvious example would be the plasmatics, these machines that the humans have developed that
Hmm.
actually use human organs, human tendons and muscles and nerve strings to drive them. So
Okay.
can hear the machines not simply making mechanical noises,
Hmm.
but gasping human type noises.
Hmm.
And if you get to look inside, you can see these muscles moving and throbbing and pumping up and down.
Yeah.
These sort of human bladders and hearts and so on, organs that are kind of suffusing with blood, emptying with blood, suffusing with blood, emptying with blood. That's kind of surrealistic and kind of, don't you think that's unsettling to have that something that is cold and hard and mechanical brought right up against human flesh?
Uh-huh. Mm.
Yeah. But another like sort of minor example would be when Ferren is in his exile walking towards the human camp and
Hmm.
passes over a landscape where the land has been cut and sliced and sort of dug in various ways, and bandages have been put across it like staples
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
sort of almost like plasters. So it's, yeah, another sort of weird combination of humanity,
Yeah.
flesh, but also the totally inanimate.
Hmm. Yeah. I thought for sure I put a question in here about the exile, but apparently I didn't. But I'm glad that you mentioned that. Um, there's a moment where help arrives from an unexpected source, but with tragic consequences. How did you intend that scene to resonate emotionally and thematically? And what does it say about faith and sacrifice in war?
Yes, it's a small episode. You mean where the in the big battle at the end where
Yeah.
Farron and Muriel have brought the tribe together to build a shelter to defend themselves from the incredible dangers of Terra Celestial war going on all around them. And at one stage, the human are sending up a force field, which are vibrations of developed from human emotions, but vibrations of hate and anger and rage and cruelty.
Mm,
And the air, you can see the air sort of pulsating. And heaven sends down the blessed souls. And the blessed souls are the souls of people, human beings who have died in the past before heaven started shutting out human souls.
mhm,
And they come down in the form of white wings. And the white wings descend and try and break through the force field. And
mm,
it seems almost like a redeeming image, except that they get burnt up.
mm.
Every single one of them gets burnt in the force field and plummets to the ground. And that's very sad. And I hope it's sad because I don't want my books to ever try and skirt around sadness. I guess the other part of that is at the end of the whole trilogy,
Mm,
on the very last page, the blessed souls come into it again. They come into it a few times all the way along, and the blessed souls come into it again. I won't describe how, but that is a scene that I've had tears in my eyes over.
yeah.
Not tears of sadness, but tears of happiness.
Mhm.
And readers have told me exactly the same. They have tears of happiness in their eyes because the blessed souls that made this terrible sacrifice and a
Mhm.
meaningless sacrifice, really, at the end, there's this redeeming scene where the blessed souls and the morphs turning into blessed souls
Mhm.
achieve an unlooked for happiness. And the way it happens is it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yes.
And
Well,
I'm not sentimental, but I had tears of happiness in my eyes just watching that scene.
I did want to mention like when you the different names and terms that you use in the book, like the people and the blessed souls, are those symbolic? Well, apparently they mean something. Was that your
Um,
intention?
well, things that the terms that relate to heavenly things
Mm-hmm.
are generally taken out of traditional religious iconography.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this was actually one of the things said it took a long while from getting to the dream to actually being able to write Feminine and the Angel.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that took a lot of time was doing research into religious iconography.
Yeah.
And this is a way back in the past. This is kind of when I was quite young, and I went to university libraries, particularly the University of Sydney Library, which
Okay.
is kind of like the Stacks, which is a compendium of every book ever published in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And going up through these dark, dusty sort of floors, along corridors, round corners, and I found a tiny little section and one book in particular by Gustav Davidson, which was an encyclopedia of angels, fallen angels, and demons.
Wow.
And that kind of became my number one Bible. And I found other books too, but these were books that no one had looked at in a million years. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
angels have become much more interesting to people more
Mm.
recently, but back then no one had ever sort of taken any great interest.
Yeah.
And I found it fascinating. I mean, like I told you, I was a university lecturer and
Mm-hmm.
academic writer for quite a lot of years, 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
That was when I had writer's block and couldn't actually manage to finish anything that I started writing. But going into this library, I discovered a love of research that I never had as an academic. I never really liked looking things up and searching things. And particularly these were the days when you had to go and find it all in books. There was no Wikipedia.
Yeah.
And this whole world opened up. It was like sort of finding a universe
Mm-hmm.
spreading out because they had so many beliefs in the past about angels and demons and about the nature of heaven. And often conflicting or endless variations,
Hmm.
but thousands of named angels,
Yeah.
different orders of angels. As I say, every version is slightly different.
Yeah.
It's Christianity,
Hmm.
particularly when I my what I got to draw on.
Hmm.
Also Judaism, also
Yeah.
Islam. I mean, those religions that seem to be at loggerheads in the modern world, they actually all have the same religious iconography.
Hmm.
Going back in the past, in the old days, they had the same religious beliefs, and it's fascinating. It's this like a vast world. I mean, I kept on researching for way beyond anything I actually needed to go into the story, but all the names of things that have to do with heaven, pretty
Hmm.
much, are taken from real traditional religious terminology. And it was, I don't know, I don't know. I hope the reader can share my love of it all. I guess I'm a bit of a messed up case, really, because my head is not religious. I'm afraid my head doesn't know what to believe in. I'm an agnostic in my head, but
Okay.
emotionally, I'm very much drawn to the beauty and the power of those old religious things, those old
Yeah.
religious images and themes. They really, really resonate with me, and religious
Mhm.
stories too. It all resonates with me, and
Mhm.
I guess I guess I write out of that part of myself, and
Mhm.
the head doesn't really have to come into it.
Yeah, I understand. By the end of the
It turned
book,
into quite a ramble, didn't it? Sorry.
oh no, oh no, I appreciate the rambles
Good.
because then I get to fully understand, okay, what is your thought process? What did you do? Like what research? I like going back into the backstory of how you came about with the different scenes, and what was it influenced by, or where did you get your research from?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's some of it at least. I mean, this is
Mhm.
nowadays if I want to look up well, let's say how a particular injury is going to produce symptoms, I just go straight to Wikipedia. It's easy. But there was something fascinating about delving into. I was in a darkened little corner of a university stack library
Yeah.
and pulling out this book that I swear was covered in dust and no one had opened it for decades, and finding all this hidden lore, all this hidden sort of mysterious lore. That is the only research I've ever truly loved for its own sake.
You know what? I honestly miss those days. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about because, well, I'm not that old, but I'm nearly 50. And back in the day, I was in college in the 1990s, um, or mid to late 1990s. And I remember, what it was like to go inside a library and, do your research. You could they'll tell you, pull a card and tell you, oh, that's in this row. And, you can, go and pull all the books that you needed and wanted for your research. On top of
Mm,
that, my parents always had, encyclopedias and all kinds of books for everything that we
mm.
needed to do research. You know,
You
I,
know what
I
I used to
really
love
miss
about.
that. Hmm.
So I was just going to say, you know what I always used to love about old libraries is
Hmm.
that you would look up a particular book that you wanted, and
Hmm.
you'd go to it, and then you'd find these other books side by side with it that were actually
Yeah.
just as much interesting or more
Yes.
interesting. You'd sort of start on a run following these.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And before you know it, you have 20 books that you're getting ready to check out.
Yep.
So by the end of the book, Farron and Marielle began to envision a new path forward that could reshape the future. Without giving away too much, can you share what their partnership represents going forward and how it might serve as a foundation for the rest of the trilogy, for those who haven't read it yet?
Mm. It is the foundation of changing the world.
Hmm.
But the way things might look as if they're heading, I mean, it might look at the end of Feminine and the Angel as though it's going to be a pretty straightforward process. It
Hmm.
isn't at all. And the antagonists that they're facing change.
Hmm.
And the residual alliance, the alliance of all the tribes against the human they're trying to set up, that's not smooth sailing either. And in the end, it's crucial spiritual to the sort of mentality and spirit, but it's not the key thing. And I guess what I always want to do is, oh, I guess I'll start at the end. What I don't want to do is produce twists that come out of nowhere. I really hate books and movies and TV series where the twist happens because they have to put a twist in, but it's not earned, it hasn't been really set up.
Okay.
And I get annoyed with that. And I want to have developments that are totally surprising.
Hmm.
And at the same time, when you look back, you think, oh yeah, I could have seen that coming, or at least that came from that. That's where the sense that it was inevitable, even though at the time when you read it, it was a total surprise.
Hmm.
And there's some total surprises in book two.
Hmm.
Book three is, well, the ultimate conflict isn't quite what you might have expected it to be by
Hmm.
the end of book one. Things change. And I guess I think of that as the nature of the world and the nature of human beings. I mean, all the characters pretty much in the Ferren trilogy keep changing as they go through the three books. And the world changes too. The nature of the conflict changes. So yeah, it builds up to a huge, huge, huge climax in book
Yeah.
three, but it's not quite what you couldn't have guessed it from the end of book one. Put it
Hmm.
like that. Yeah. And the key is, yeah, all the way along, is the friendship between Farron and Mirail.
Hmm.
That's what we start out with, and that is still the key by the end.
Yeah.
But all the things surrounding it,
Hmm.
I think you'd probably not guess them unless you'd read the whole thought.
But you know what? That's what you call great storytelling. I thoroughly enjoyed your trilogy. I can't say which one is my favorite.
Well, thank you.
But they're all good so far. Um,
I would hope that the three together are bigger than any one alone.
mm-hmm.
There's a sort of an overarching story arc that
Oh
actually
yeah.
is bigger than any one story. But yeah, you're a thriller writer. This is your bread and butter. I mean, like how you build up tension, how
Mhm.
stories develop, how you work surprises and things. I mean, these are things that fantasy writers often lose sight of,
Yeah.
but they're the crucial elements of storytelling.
Yeah.
And yeah, I like them too. I like them too.
Yeah, I have a newfound appreciation for fantasy. I really
Oh,
do.
good.
Seriously, I really do. I haven't read I mean, this this year alone, I've read so many fantasy books by mostly indie authors, and I am finding a newfound appreciation for it, especially, with writers like you. I'm like, wow, I couldn't do that. I've been writing all my life, basically, but I could never write. So I'm going to stay in my own lane.
Yeah,
I'll enjoy reading a fantasy, but I will not attempt to write a fantasy.
yeah,
I'll
fair
leave it
enough.
to the experts.
I would still like to write a thriller, but I don't suppose I ever
Really?
will. Well, actually, the my first Pan Macmillan published book, The Dark Edge, was science fiction or science fantasy,
Okay.
and I wanted to do a follow-up, and I kind of wanted to do something different. And
Hmm.
in a way, it was a murder mystery.
Hmm.
And I mean, the first book was a murder mystery too, but in a science fiction fantasy way.
Hmm.
Whereas the second book was much more of just a murder mystery with a very small cast of characters.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I thought I could do it, and yeah, not really, not really. I guess one of the things about being a writer is you find out what you're good at, don't you?
That's true. Yes,
Mm.
that is so
I always wished this time when I had 25 years of writer's block of not
true.
being able to
Oh,
finish a
wow.
single book that I started. And one of the things I should have done and was too proud to do was to show my unsatisfactory, unfinished books to other people and
Mm,
get their feedback because I couldn't be a criticism, and I'm still not real good at taking criticism, but the other thing that people can do is tell you what you're doing well, and that's so important to know what you're doing well.
yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, absolutely.
Mm.
Well, this has been so fun. I really enjoyed interviewing you. So thank you for
Yeah,
coming
me
and
too.
talking
I've
about.
enjoyed this. I really have.
Yes. Yes, me as well. Thank you for coming on and discussing Farron and the Angel, Book One, um, which is available on Amazon. But why don't you tell everyone where they can keep up with you as far as your website and your socials?
Okay, well, the two websites I have are Ferren, fervn.com.au
Okay.
and richardharland.au. Social media, Richard Harland Books, Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I mean, Richard Harland. There aren't too many Richard Harlands around the world, so I've been googling Richard Harland. Generally, gets you somewhere soon. And what else? What other things should I say? I actually don't have everything to hand, but I've got TikTok account and
Okay. Yeah.
YouTube and all sorts of things.
Instagram. Oh, YouTube. Okay. Well, I'll also include all of that information in the description in post edits as well, so that everyone can have all your socials and where to purchase the book and your website. So
Yeah.
don't
Can I hold the
worry.
book up just while I'm here?
Oh,
My agent has
absolutely.
always said every interview or talk you do, you should always hold your book up three times.
Yes,
One,
yes.
two, three.
Hold it up
A
higher.
good cover, isn't it?
I love the cover. You have to hold it up
Yeah.
higher. Hold it up higher.
Oh, sorry. I'm looking at a screen that's showing a nice little rural scene instead of seeing you or myself. I can't. Is that okay?
Yes, I don't see your title, but I see the picture. If you move it up a little bit higher, like right above your head. Okay, perfect. Yes, Farron and the Angel, the Farron trilogy, book one.
Yeah. There is Muriel falling to earth at the very beginning.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, our fallen angel.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Richard.